Philo Taylor Farnsworth was an American inventor and television pioneer. He made many contributions that were crucial to the early development of all electronic television. He is perhaps best known for his 1927 invention of the first fully functional all-electronic image pickup device, the image dissector, as well as the first fully functional and complete all-electronic television system. He was also the first person to demonstrate such a system to the public. Farnsworth developed a television system complete with receiver and camera, which he produced commercially in the firm of the Farnsworth Television and Radio Corporation, from 1938 to 1951, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. In later life, Farnsworth invented a small nuclear fusion device, the Farnsworth-He fuser, or simply, fuser, employing inertial electrostatic confinement. Although not a practical device for generating nuclear energy, the fuser serves as a viable source of neutrons. The design of this device has been the acknowledged inspiration for other fusion approaches, including the Polywell reactor concept in terms of a general approach to fusion design. Farnsworth held 165 patents, mostly in radio and television. Early life. Philo T. Farnsworth was born August 19, 1906, the eldest of 5 children of Louis Edwin Farnsworth and Serena Amanda Bastian, a Mormon couple then living in a small log cabin built by Louis's father in a place called Indian Creek near Beaver, Utah. In 1918, the family moved to a relative's 240-acre ranch near Rigby, Idaho, where Louis supplemented his farming income by hauling freight with his horse-drawn wagon. Philo was excited to find his new home was wired for electricity, with a Delco generator providing power for lighting and farm machinery. He was a quick student in mechanical and electrical technology, repairing the troublesome generator, and upon finding a burned-out electric motor among some items discarded by the previous tenants, proceeding to rewind the armature and convert his mother's hand-powered washing machine into an electric-powered one. Philo developed an early interest in electronics after his first telephone conversation with an out-of-state relative and the discovery of a large cache of technology magazines in the attic of the family's new home, and won a $25 first prize in a pulp magazine contest for inventing a magnetized car lock. Farnsworth excelled in chemistry and physics at Rigby High School. He asked his high school science teacher, Justin Tolman, for advice about an electronic television system he was contemplating. He provided the teacher with sketches and diagrams covering several blackboards to show how it might be accomplished electronically. He asked his teacher if he should go ahead with his ideas, and he was encouraged to do so. One of the drawings he did on a blackboard for his chemistry teacher was recalled and reproduced for a patent interference case between Farnsworth and Radio Corporation of America. In 1923, the Farnsworths moved to Provo, Utah, and Farnsworth attended Brigham Young High School beginning that fall. His father died of pneumonia in January 1924, at age 58, and Farnsworth, as eldest son, assumed responsibility for sustaining the family while still attending high school and graduating in June 1924. He went on to attend Brigham Young University that year, and to earn junior radiotrician certification from the National Radio Institute, adding a full certification in 1925. While attending college, he met Provo High School student Elmer Pem Gardner, whom he would later marry. Later in 1924, Farnsworth applied to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where he was recruited after he earned the nation's second highest score on academy tests. However, he was already thinking ahead to his television projects and, upon learning the government would own his patents if he stayed in the military, he sought and received an honorable discharge within months, under a provision in which the eldest child in a fatherless family could be excused from military service in order to provide for his family. He returned to Provo and enrolled again at Brigham Young University, where he was allowed to take advanced science classes. Philo worked while his sister Agnes, the elder of the two sisters, took charge of the family home and the second-floor boarding house. The Farnsworths later moved into half of a duplex, with family friends the Gardners moving into the other side when it became vacant. Philo developed a close friendship with Pem Gardner's brother, Cliff Gardner, who shared Farnsworth's interest in electronics. The two moved to Salt Lake City to start a radio repair business. The business failed and Gardner returned to Provo. Farnsworth remained in Salt Lake City, and through enrollment in a University of Utah job placement service became acquainted with Leslie Gorrell and George Everson, a pair of San Francisco philanthropists who were then conducting a Salt Lake City community chest fundraising campaign. They agreed to fund Farnsworth's early television research with an initial $6,000 in backing, and set up a laboratory in Los Angeles for Farnsworth to carry out his experiments. Before relocating to California, Farnsworth married Pem Gardner Farnsworth on May 27, 1926, and the two traveled to the West Coast in a Pullman coach. Career. A few months after arriving in California, Farnsworth was prepared to show his models and drawings to a patent attorney who was nationally recognized as an authority on electrophysics. Everson and Gorrell agreed that Farnsworth should apply for patents for his designs, a decision which proved crucial in later disputes with RCA. Most television systems in use at the time used image scanning devices employing rotating, Nitkoff discs, comprising lenses arranged in spiral patterns such that they swept across an image in a succession of short arcs while focusing the light they captured on photosensitive elements, thus producing a varying electrical signal corresponding to the variations in light intensity. Farnsworth recognized the limitations of the mechanical systems, and that an all-electronic scanning system could produce a superior image for transmission to a receiving device. On September 7, 1927, Farnsworth's image dissector camera tube transmitted its first image, a simple straight line, to a receiver in another room of his laboratory at 202 Green Street in San Francisco. Pem Farnsworth recalled in 1985 that her husband broke the stunned silence of his lab assistants by saying, "There you are, electronic television." The source of the image was a glass slide, backlit by an arc lamp. An extremely bright source was required because of the low light sensitivity of the design. By 1928, Farnsworth had developed the system sufficiently to hold a demonstration for the press. His backers had demanded to know when they would see dollars from the invention, so the first image shown was, appropriately, a dollar sign. In 1929, the design was further improved by elimination of a motor generator, so the television system now had no mechanical parts. That year, Farnsworth transmitted the first live human images using his television system, including a 3.5-inch image of his wife Pem. Many inventors had built electromechanical television systems before Farnsworth's seminal contribution, but Farnsworth designed and built the world's first working all-electronic television system, employing electronic scanning in both the pickup and display devices. He first demonstrated his system to the press on September 3, 1928, and to the public at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia on August 25, 1934. In 1930, Vladimir Zworykin, who had been developing his own all-electronic television system at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh since 1923, but which he had never been able to make work or satisfactorily demonstrate to his superiors, was recruited by RCA to lead its television development department. Before leaving his old employer, Zworykin visited Farnsworth's laboratory and was sufficiently impressed with the performance of the image dissector that he reportedly had his team at Westinghouse make several copies of the device for experimentation. But Zworykin later abandoned research on the image dissector. which at the time required extremely bright illumination of its subjects to be effective, and turned his attention to what would become the iconoscope. In a 1970s series of videotaped interviews, Zworykin recalled that Farnsworth was closer to this thing you're using now, i.e., a video camera, than anybody, because he used the cathode ray tube for transmission. But Farnsworth didn't have the mosaic of discrete light elements. He didn't have storage. Therefore, picture definition was very low. But he was very proud, and he stuck to his method, contrary to Zworykin's statement. Farnsworth's patent number 2,087,683 for the image dissector features a low-velocity method of electron scanning, and describes discrete particles, whose potential is manipulated and saturated to varying degrees depending on their velocity. Farnsworth's patent numbers 2,140,695 and 2,233,888 are for a charge storage dissector and charge storage amplifier, respectively. In 1931, David Sarnoff of RCA offered to buy Farnsworth's patents for $100,000, with the stipulation that he become an employee of RCA. But Farnsworth refused. In June of that year, Farnsworth joined the Philco company and moved to Philadelphia along with his wife and 2 children. RCA would later file an interference suit against Farnsworth, claiming Zworykin's 1923 patent had priority over Farnsworth's design, despite the fact it could present no evidence that Zworykin had actually produced a functioning transmitter tube before 1931. Farnsworth had lost 2 interference claims to Zworykin in 1928, but this time he prevailed and the U.S. Patent Office rendered a decision in 1934 awarding priority of the invention of the image dissector to Farnsworth. RCA lost a subsequent appeal, but litigation over a variety of issues continued for several years, with Sarnoff finally agreeing to pay Farnsworth royalties. Zworykin received a patent in 1928 for a color transmission version of his 1923 patent application. He also divided his original application in 1931, receiving a patent in 1935, while a second one was eventually issued in 1938 by the Court of Appeals on a non-Farnsworth-related interference case, and over the objection of the Patent Office. In 1932, while in England to raise money for his legal battles with RCA, Farnsworth met with John Logie Baird, a Scottish inventor who had given the world's first public demonstration of a working television system in London in 1926, using an electromechanical imaging system, and who was seeking to develop electronic television receivers. Baird demonstrated his mechanical system for Farnsworth. Baird's company directors pursued a merger with Farnsworth, paying $50,000 to supply electronic television equipment and provide access to Farnsworth patents. Baird and Farnsworth competed with EMI for the UK standard television system, but EMI merged with the Marconi Company in 1934, gaining access to the RCA iconoscope patents. After trials of both systems, a BBC committee chose the Marconi EMI system, which was by then virtually identical to RCA's system. The image dissector scanned well but had poor light sensitivity compared to the Marconi EMI iconoscopes, dubbed emitrons. In March 1932, Philco denied Farnsworth time to travel to Utah to bury his young son Kenny, placing a strain on Farnsworth's marriage, and possibly marking the beginning of his struggle with depression. In May 1933, the Philco severed its relationship with Farnsworth because, said Everson, it had become apparent that Philo's aim at establishing a broad patent structure through research was not identical with the production program of Philco. In Everson's view, the decision was mutual and amicable. Philco set up shop at 127 East Mermaid Lane in Philadelphia, and in 1934 held the first public exhibition of his device at the Franklin Institute in that city. After sailing to Europe in 1934, Farnsworth secured an agreement with Goer's Bosch Fernseh in Germany. Some image dissector cameras were used to broadcast the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. Farnsworth returned to his laboratory, and by 1936 his company was regularly transmitting entertainment programs on an experimental basis. That same year, while working with University of Pennsylvania biologists, Farnsworth developed a process to sterilize milk using radio waves. He also invented a fog-penetrating beam for ships and airplanes. In 1936 he attracted the attention of Collier's Weekly, which described his work in glowing terms. One of those amazing facts of modern life that just don't seem possible, namely, electrically scanned television that seems destined to reach your home next year, was largely given to the world by a 19-year-old boy from Utah. Today, barely 30 years old, he is setting the specialized world of science on its ears. In 1938, Farnsworth established the Farnsworth Television and Radio Corporation in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with E.A. Nicholas as president and himself as director of research. In September 1939, after a more than decade-long legal battle, RCA finally conceded to a multi-year licensing agreement concerning Farnsworth's 1927 patent for television totaling $1 million. RCA was then free, after showcasing electronic television at New York World's Fair on April 20, 1939, to sell electronic television cameras to the public. Farnsworth Television and Radio Corporation was purchased by International Telephone and Telegraph in 1951. During his time at ITT, Farnsworth worked in a basement laboratory known as The Cave on Pontiac Street in Fort Wayne. From there he introduced a number of breakthrough concepts, including a defense early warning signal, submarine detection devices, radar calibration equipment and an infrared telescope. Philo was a very deep person, tough to engage in conversation, because he was always thinking about what he could do next, said Art Rezeler, an ITT photographer who documented Farnsworth's work in pictures. One of Farnsworth's most significant contributions at ITT was the PPI projector, an enhancement on the iconic circular sweep radar display, which allowed safe air traffic control from the ground. This system, developed in the 1950s, was the forerunner of today's air traffic control systems. In addition to his electronics research, ITT management agreed to nominally fund Farnsworth's nuclear fusion research. He and staff members invented and refined a series of fusion reaction tubes called fusers. For scientific reasons unknown to Farnsworth and his staff, the necessary reactions lasted no longer than 30 seconds. In December 1965, ITT came under pressure from its board of directors to terminate the expensive project and sell the Farnsworth subsidiary. It was only due to the urging of President Harold Janine that the 1966 budget was accepted, extending ITT's fusion research for an additional year. The stress associated with this managerial ultimatum, however, caused Farnsworth to suffer a relapse. A year later he was terminated and eventually allowed medical retirement. In the spring of 1967, Farnsworth and his family moved back to Utah to continue his fusion research at Brigham Young University, which presented him with an honorary doctorate. The university also offered him office space and an underground concrete bunker for the project. Realizing the fusion lab was to be dismantled at ITT, Farnsworth invited staff members to accompany him to Salt Lake City, as team members in Philo T. Farnsworth Associates. By late 1968, the Associates began holding regular business meetings and PTAFA was underway. Although a contract with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was promptly secured, and more possibilities were within reach, financing stalled for the $24,000 in monthly expenses required to cover salaries and equipment rental. By Christmas 1970, PTFA had failed to secure the necessary financing, and the Farnsworths had sold all their own ITT stock and cashed in Philo's life insurance policy to maintain organizational stability. The underwriter had failed to provide the financial backing that was to have supported the organization during its critical first year. The banks called in all outstanding loans, repossession notices were placed on anything not previously sold, and the Internal Revenue Service put a lock on the laboratory door until delinquent taxes were paid. In January 1971, PTFA disbanded. Farnsworth had begun abusing alcohol in his later years, and as a consequence he became seriously ill with pneumonia, and died on March 11, 1971. Farnsworth's wife Elma Gardner, Pem Farnsworth, fought for decades after his death to assure his place in history. Farnsworth always gave her equal credit for creating television, saying, "My wife and I started this TV." She died on April 27, 2006, at age 98. The inventor and wife were survived by two sons, Russell and Kent. In 1999, Time magazine included Farnsworth in their Time 100, the most important people of the century.